Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to the channel. You may wonder why I'm doing a Wild Rift video. It's not like I haven't given up Wild Rift, guys. I do still like the game. I just needed a break. The fact that esports got killed off, and I know that doesn't matter to a lot of you, but to me it did matter because I'm a caster and my passion has always been for competitive gaming. So the esports news really killed my enthusiasm for the game. And in general, I just haven't had enough time. Like, I haven't had the time to sit there and grind Wild Rift because Christmas has been coming up, the kids have been going crazy, Arthur's now getting older and walking around, so I can't just have him sat in a seat anymore. He wants to be all over the place. So 2 kids has reduced my time even more, and obviously work as well. So it's just been difficult really for me to play. But I wanted to do this video about matchmaking because it's become a bit of a hot topic in the community recently. Before we get into it though, thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. There is a reference link in the description below. Now you may have seen on Twitter, if you do have Twitter and you follow people like Hell's Devil and Darkbreaker, that they very recently tweeted about matchmaking and how it has completely ruined their love for the game. And even Hells, who is a completely, absolutely 100% dedicated Wild Rift content creator, is struggling to enjoy the game that he's playing. Darkbreaker, exactly the same here. And this leads me to the question, because I'm going to separate this video into a couple of sections. Is there a problem with matchmaking in Wild Rift? And my answer is, it depends how you look at it. If you are a top 0.1% player, yes, there's definitely going to be a problem for you. Because you are just that much better than the majority of the players in the pool that the algorithm or the system tries to match you with. Unfortunately, especially with people like Darkbreaker and Hells, who usually play during the day, during non-peak hours especially as well. I know that Darkbreaker does play a lot of peak hours on stream too, but, you know, there just isn't enough players at their skill level, these guys' skill level, to effectively match them with at any given time. If you had every single pro player queue up individually, no duo queue, no trio queue, all in their respective roles, you know, the system would probably be able to match those guys together fairly well. But there just isn't a robust enough pool of players at Darkbreakers and that level of competition to give you fair, in inverted commas, matchmaking. The second part of this is matchmaking in general is not done, as I've said on several videos before, on your visual skill tier. So talking about Grandmasters and Masters is completely irrelevant because those, frankly, Grandmaster and Master, etc., is completely meaningless for a couple of reasons. The first is that it matches you on your hidden MMR, which no one sees, no one knows how it's calculated, but it generally has to do with win streaks, who you win against, who you lose against, etc. And that hidden MMR rating is what the game uses to create team MMRs and then therefore look for balanced and fair matches. The other reason is that since they introduced the mark system all the way up to Grandmaster and introduced the loss prevention system, those ranks are massively inflated. I said it when this came into the game, that you would inflate the high ranks, and it has inflated the high ranks. You don't even need a 50% win ratio to climb. It will take you a long time with a sub 50% win ratio to climb, but because of loss prevention, you don't need a 50% win ratio to climb. So, this is a question that I'm going to ask you right now, and I'd love to hear in the comments. Would you prefer loss prevention, or would, especially in Diamond Plus, or would you prefer to, inflated Grandmaster, Master ranks? Because you're going to get one of the two. My personal take is remove loss prevention from Diamond above, and therefore you have to have, by virtue of the mark system, a greater than 50% win ratio to climb. That's my take. Unfair and loss prevention is a very good system for casual players. It means if they have a bad game or the game gets trolled, they always have this backup to say, well, I didn't lose anything for that, so it doesn't feel like my time is wasted. But that is the very core of this beginning problem. The high ranks are meaningless, especially Master and Grandmaster, because of the loss prevention system inflating them, but also because they're not actually used to match you together. And the players that really struggle with matchmaking are that much better than the majority of the players that they're capable of matching with, that their games are either going to feel like a stomp or like they're getting rolled because their team isn't at their level, or they're playing up against people who are like 1 or 2 people that are similar level to them and their team just can't keep up. It is what it is. Okay, before we jump into that, I'm going to show you before we talk about topics, I'm going to kind of show you how the game tries to kind of match you together. I'm going to try and it's going to work. So there's little player 1, there's little player 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they all feed in to team 1. I'm going to draw a little sword. Terrible little sword here. This is the battle swords. Yeah. Team 2. Now, what will happen is obviously a lot of people, more than 10 people will be queuing at a time. And what will happen is that Riot will find 5 people on one side and 5 people on one side that they're hidden MMRs, so their MMRs all go to join into a team MMR. And the system puts these two numbers up against each other and says, this is giving us some percentage of a fair match. And I think my guess is that it says this is as close to a 50-50 win percentage based on the number alone, this magical number alone, that we think the system can get us. So what they will find the 5 best people on either team in whatever makeup, including all these complex extra parts like role selection preference, etc. So you've got to remember that the system already has a very complex job to do before it gets to this point. It has to find 10 people, of all of whom have got a relatively, or all of whom ideally are in their exact role preference, of which their individual MMRs come together to create team MMRs that the system then puts together and gives a close to, as possible, 50% win rate. The system wants to give either team the most balanced chance of winning the game based on this magical number called MMR. And so that brings you to team 1 and team 2, and it puts you into game. What the system does not do, and we're going to go to, right? I don't want to save that. I want to get a new, right. Don't save. What the system does not do is when your little dudes are in champion select, the system simply gets you to champion select. Okay? That's what it does. Once you're in champion select, the matchmaking is done. You're in the game, right? When you get into champion select, if this guy decides to pick Teemo and says, I'm support, the system doesn't know that he's going to do that. Especially if he's not done that in the past. I don't know how I mean, I'd imagine it's quite a robust and kind of intricate system, but I don't know how much of the system takes into account like match history, for instance. Does it know that this person in support is going to pick a non-traditional support? How I guess complex is this matchmaking system? Can it pick up on those type of things? But whatever, if he's never done that before, this guy says, I just got smashed by a Yone, I'm going to first pick him mid, and I've never played him before. System doesn't know he's going to do that. This guy has 500 games on Lee Sin, and the system thinks he's pretty good jungler, but he matched equally in skill to this jungler. He picks Lee Sin because he's very good at it. This jungler is like, oh, Lilia just came out. I'm going to pick Lilia. System didn't know it was going to do that. This guy has an anger management problem and decides to run it down because he died level 1 in lane. The system has no idea. That is not matchmaking's fault. What you can say is it's a failure of the reporting system and the banning system. That is fair, especially if these people have done it more than once. That's a fair assessment. But to say any of these problems are matchmaking's problems is not correct. Matchmaking cannot read player intentions. It simply looks at their expected skill and puts them together to try and give them 50-50 outcome. I read so many comments where it's like, I get matched with feeders and whatever, and they kind of completely run over the fact, or I get matched with first timers and feeders and people who play off role, and they completely run over the fact that actually, for a lot of those problems aren't actually matchmaking problems. That's just a player base and a failure of the reporting and banning system problem. So matchmaking has no idea what happens once you get to champ select most of the time. And then when you get into game, obviously, it expects players to perform at a certain level. But of course, like, player mastery score and how good they are with specific champions, it really depends on what they pick in champion select. You could have a player, like I said, who's got this guy he's like thousands of mastery points in Lee Sin, but he doesn't pick Lee Sin. He just picks, I don't know, Warwick, a bad champion that he doesn't know how to play. He's not going to be as good on Warwick as he is on Lee Sin. So therefore, the system has determined him to be good because he's probably played a lot of Lee Sin. So the system's just like, oh, this guy's good in his position, right? So, you know, we're going to match him with another good jungler. But then they just pick another champion that they haven't got the same mastery and they don't know how to play as well. The system can't predict that. And therefore, they're going to play below their kind of like expected skill. So there is a lot of extra variables. And the point I'm trying to get across here is there are so many extra variables in Wild Rift matchmaking that cannot be predicted by the matchmaking system alone. These things are player human behavior, which no one can fully 100% predict. Just can't happen, as far as I'm aware. If a dev reaches out to me and tells me that I'm wrong, I'm willing to eat my words on this. But as far as I'm aware, matchmaking gets you to champion select. And after that, Jesus, take the friggin' wheel. Would you move? There we go. Right. So, here is the first conundrum. Especially at high levels. Do you want the most balanced match physically possible over this side? Or do you want a quick queue? Because you're going to complain about one or the other. The ideal place is somewhere in the middle, right? So the ideal place is somewhere in the middle. Like, the sweet spot is where you have a relatively good match and a relatively quick queue. That's kind of what generally where Riot wants to balance this as much as possible, right? If you watch League of Legends very high-level PC players, the top of the top PC players, some of them can end up in queue for like 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes. And they often play other games. Most people in Wild Rift, especially even the high-level players, on their mobile, do not want to sit in queue for 10 to 15 minutes. Just don't want it. And therefore, the quicker that you make the queue, the less good the match is. So you move it towards quicker queue, the less good the match is going to get. The more close that you let the algorithm match you to other players, the longer the queue is going to get. That is just a fact of how this matchmaking system works. Either you're prepared to have longer queues but more balanced matches, or you want to have quicker queues, but you're going to accept that sometimes those matches are not going to be that good. That is the very basic element of kind of like what Riot has to balance. These are the two major wants when people are jumping into a queue to get into a game. And for a mobile game, you'd think that a lot of people want to err on the side of quick queue. Now, my argument here is that Wild Rift is way too long average game time to be treated like a normal mobile game. Most people that I know that enjoy Wild Rift at a high level are usually seated at home on their Wi-Fi, especially in the West. However, if we were to take this as an element of a normal mobile game, let's take a comparison of Clash Royale, you want to kick your phone open, get into a game ASAP, because you do not want to be sat in queue doing nothing, wasting battery on your phone. That principle does somewhat apply to Wild Rift, although I think Wild Rift, unfortunately, is a little bit too long and too, I would say, almost too good, too hardcore of a mobile game. Same problem that Vainglory had. Too good, too hardcore of a mobile game. To kind of believe that the player behavior pattern is that they just boot up their phone at lunch and play a ranked game. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I don't know many people, especially in the West. I don't know if it's similar in Southeast Asia or whatever, but I don't know many people that just go on their lunch break and decide they're going to play a ranked game of Wild Rift, because you have no idea how long that's going to last, and it could eat up like 30 to 45 minutes of your lunch break. I usually play when I'm at home and I'm in bed and I know I've got the time to do so. Whereas with Clash Royale, I will kick that open at lunch or a break and play a couple of games very quickly. That's just kind of the nature of the game. Of course, the other problem is, as I mentioned, the player base at the very high level problem. Usually, when we talk about players, we just kind of have huge swaths. We have our like very high tier players of like the 0.1%. Then we've got like the top 1% ish. and then everyone else. Because that doesn't matter, right? I'm pulling these numbers out my butt. But ultimately, what we're talking about here is these guys are challenger grinders. Like, challengers, extremely good players, previous mobile MOBA experience. They're very, very good. They make up the smallest total volume of players in the game. A 1%, usually in League, you would probably consider this Diamond Plus. It's probably a bit higher than that in Wild Rift, but we could say like Masters or Diamond Plus, right? And these guys make up a sizable volume, but still only 1%. Then we have everyone else. And these guys are like, you know, anywhere from like Emerald below, etc. Like, and these guys is like your biggest portion of the player base. Might also call them more casual players. These guys are the easiest to matchmake for because there are just loads of people in here. They're also, ironically, the people that generally complain about the elements of matchmaking that are completely out of matchmakers' control. Diamond, not, you know, the 1%, not awful to matchmake for, but you're going to find that teams start to become a little less balanced. Difficult to get people of relative skill because at this level, you've definitely got one-trick players. You've got people who sometimes might get put off role. You've got people who like to try new champions. You've got people who tilt easily, etc. Like, you've got a lot of extra factors here that mean that it's a bit more difficult. And at Challenger, it gets even worse. You've got pro players and very high level players who are very good. You've got one tricks. You've got all that kind of stuff. But what I will say is that because of how small this part of the player base is, especially at non-peak times, and also given the fact that you've got to matchmake for role selection, you've got to matchmake for duo and trio combinations, blah 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 blah, all the extra things. It means finding a game where you don't bleed into this pool, at least the top end of this pool. Finding a game where you don't bleed into the top end of this pool is very difficult. Consistently, you know, like at some point, the 0.1% are going to have to play with the 1%. Not always, but they will. And then because of how big the skill discrepancy is between these two players, and given the what I just mentioned before this, talking about elo inflation and loss prevention, you're going to find that the challengers have bad quality games because either they stomp or they get stomped just because of an imbalance of players on either side. That is just a player-based problem at the very top. And like I mentioned way back at the start, or before this as well, you either have good matchmaking or you have long queue times. And that's just a kind of a trade-off you've got to make. So, to kind of conclude this relatively quick video on matchmaking, is Wild Rift matchmaking bad? No, I'm actually pretty sure the system that Joshua Menk put together is pretty good. It's probably pretty good at what it does. The problem is, especially in this type of game, the system can only get you so far. You need to have a strong punishment system in place as well to kind of weed out bad actors and bad human behavior players to eventually improve it. But the problem is that I don't think Wild Rift can do that, especially at the top level, because you'll end up having less players to pull from. I don't think the player base is big enough at the top levels to have really insanely balanced matches all the time. And that is the issue. Just there isn't enough players at the top level right now, and there isn't enough players to satisfy the 0.1% needs to have consistently 100% balanced matches. Combine that with loss prevention and a lot of the inflated players, and the fact that visual skill tier is often used to equate to a player's skill rather than this hidden number that we can't see. You get people complaining about it all the time. Do I think the improvements can be made? Absolutely. I think matchmaking is difficult to get right, and ultimately, I think if I were a top level player, I'd probably say I'd be happy to wait a little bit longer to get a good match. But then that's, it's a difficult. I can't say it. I'm not a top level player, so you're better off asking them. But I hope this helped give a little bit of insight into matchmaking, and hopefully helped you kind of think about it a bit better, and also understand that it's not really Riot's fault what happens from Champion Select in terms of matchmaking. It is Riot's fault in terms of not punishing bad actors and trolls, but it's not really their fault in terms of matchmaking what happens in Champion Select, as far as I'm aware anyway. Hope you enjoyed. See you soon.